You ever accidentally ruin your entire evening? Not like I stayed up too late playing video games, ruin your own evening. What I mean is you sat down to relax and your brain chose violence. A few weeks ago, my player two and I decided to throw on one of the all time classic movies, Tombstone. Because sometimes you don't need a new movie. Sometimes you just need Val Kilmer reminding the entire world that charisma can, in fact, kill a man. And you know what? I was having a great time. Doc Holliday is stealing every scene he's in. Kurt Russell's got the mustache working overtime. The Cowboys are walking around looking like Hot Topic sponsored an outlaw gang. Everything is exactly as it should be. But then my brain decided to ask one stupid little question. I wonder if that actually happened just like that. Now, a normal person would have just shrugged it off, finished the movie, and gone promptly to bed. Maybe watched TikTok until their phone decided to land on their face. But not me. Oh no. I grabbed my phone and I made what scientists refer to as a terrible decision. Because one Google search became two, and two became six, and six became me sitting in complete silence at 11:30 at night reading academic papers about Wyatt Earp. Academic papers about Wyatt Earp. What happened to me? And here's the weird part. The more I read, the less I recognized the guy I'd spent my entire life thinking I knew. Because somewhere between history, Hollywood, television, books, and about 100 years of retelling, the very real Wyatt Earp had disappeared completely. Not exaggerated or polished, but disappeared and replaced by someone else. Someone better, cleaner, more heroic, more marketable. And once I realized that, I made another mistake. I decided to look up another favorite movie of mine, Braveheart. Then one of Player Two's favorites, Pocahontas. And then American Sniper. And you know what? I don't think Hollywood has a history problem. I think we have a myth problem. And I don't know how deep this goes yet. But you're coming with me. So welcome to another edition of Ctrl Alt Delusion. Hey, and welcome back to the Average Joe Nerdcast, the show where we chase rabbit holes, ask better questions than answers, and occasionally discover that the movies we loved as a kid was held together with duct tape, dramatic music, and outright historical fraud. I'm Nate, your resident Average Joe, professional overthinker, amateur historian, and a man who accidentally turned hey, I'll just Google one thing real quick into 3 hours of reading academic papers about Wyatt Earp instead of doing literally anything productive around the house. Player 2 was like, so did you not watch the movie? No, I did not. I started a brand new personality. At this point, my browser history looks less like a normal adult and more like someone trying to solve a murder from 1881. Wyatt Earp, Stuart Lake, did people actually wear red sashes? Battle of Stirling Bridge. Wait, where's the bridge? Google has got to think I'm one search away from stealing a horse. And here's the thing. This keeps happening to me. I start looking up one tiny little question and somehow I end up questioning an entire piece of history I thought everyone knew, which is exactly what happened a few weeks ago. Now, real quick before we disappear into 100 years of historical nonsense, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're watching on YouTube, then please do me a huge favor. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so YouTube occasionally remembers that we exist. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, please follow the show, and if you've got just 30 seconds, leave us a rating and review. Seriously, those reviews help independent shows more than you probably realize. And they help more nerds find this weird little corner of the internet we've built together. Okay, now, let's go see what Hollywood did to Wyatt Earp. Now, before we really start pulling historical figures apart, I want to make something crystal clear. This is not a movie review. I'm not here to ruin anyone's favorite films. Tombstone is absolutely incredible. Braveheart still makes me want to scream, "Freedom!" despite knowing full well half those costumes belong in a completely different century. And Disney's Pocahontas still has one of the prettiest soundtracks that they have ever made. Good movies can still be good movies. That's not what this is about. Because movies have always changed history. They combine characters, they compress timelines, they invent conversations no one wrote down because, believe it or not, people in real life don't usually end an argument with a perfectly crafted Oscar-worthy speech while violins swell in the background. That's storytelling. We all understand that. The problem starts when we stop remembering where the storytelling ends and where history begins. Because somewhere along the way, the movie version quietly replaces the real one. And then something really weird happens. You stop saying, "well, in the movie," and you start saying, "well, Wyatt Earp," or "William Wallace," or "Pocahontas," as if those two things are automatically the same. And that got me thinking. Who decides which version survives? Because myths don't write themselves. Someone writes them, edits them, leaves things out, decides who gets to be the hero, decides who gets forgiven, decides which ugly parts quietly disappear before the credits roll. And here's the question that kept me awake longer than it probably should have. Not, did Hollywood get this wrong? That's actually the least interesting question. The interesting question is, why did this version win? Why this Wyatt Earp? Why this William Wallace? Why this Pocahontas? Why do these particular stories survive while the real people slowly disappear underneath them? Because I don't think Hollywood invented the myth machine. I think Hollywood just figured out how to mass produce it. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop seeing it. So, without further ado, let's head to Tombstone, Arizona. Or, at least, the version of Tombstone most of us grew up believing. So, Wyatt Earp. Or at least the guy I thought was Wyatt Earp. Because if you'd asked me a few weeks ago who Wyatt Earp was, I'd have answered with complete confidence. Hero, lawman, cleaned up the West, probably walked away from explosions without looking back. Wyatt Earp. Turns out, I didn't know Wyatt Earp. I knew Hollywood Wyatt Earp. And those are two very different people. The first thing that shocked me wasn't that Hollywood exaggerated him. Movies exaggerate everyone. If they made a movie about me, it'd probably be Ryan Gosling. Or, if we're sticking to the budget, Danny DeVito standing on two phone books. Hey, that's cinema, baby. No, what shocked me was learning the legend didn't actually start with Hollywood. Hollywood inherited it. And that's way creepier. Because somewhere, there was a moment where the real man quietly disappeared, and the myth took his place. See, before 1931, Wyatt Earp wasn't this larger-than-life American icon. He was just a dude, a very complicated dude. Sometimes a lawman, sometimes a gambler, sometimes running saloons, sometimes promoting boxing, and sometimes leaving town under circumstances that historians politely describe as legally complicated, which is historians speak for, buddy, maybe keep walking. Then Wyatt dies, and 2 years later, a writer named Stuart Lake publishes a biography called Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal. And my friends, this is where my eyebrows entered low Earth orbit, because historians have spent decades tearing this book apart. John Mac Farragher from Yale called it an imaginative hoax, which might be my favorite academic insult of all time. Just imagine spending years writing a book only for Yale to respond, "Ha, cute." Lake later admitted he made things up, not accidentally, on purpose. He invented dialogue, cleaned up events, smoothed rough edges, built a better hero. His explanation? He felt journalistically justified. No, no, sir, that is not how journalism works. That's like me robbing a bank and telling the judge, I felt financially justified. And here's where I almost laughed out loud. Lake barely even knew Wyatt Earp. They had met a handful of times. And when Earp dies, Lake finishes the book anyway, talks with Wyatt's widow, who, to be fair, also had every reason to polish the family image. And suddenly, America has a brand new frontier superhero. Then Hollywood gets involved. And here's where it finally clicked for me. Hollywood didn't create Wyatt Earp. Hollywood franchised him. From books, movies, TV shows, even more movies, even more books, generations grow up watching the same version until eventually, no one even remembers there was another version at all. And that's the part that stuck with me. Not because it was Wyatt Earp, no, because how many other people has this happened to? And just think about it. We all do this. You hear a story enough times from enough people over enough years, and eventually your brain just stamps it. Yep, that's probably true. No one sits you down and says, okay, bud, this next part is mostly fan fiction. It just becomes reality. The gunfight at the OK Corral itself lasted just about 30 seconds. 30 seconds! I've had longer conversations trying to cancel subscriptions. It wasn't some clean showdown between white hats and black hats. It was incredibly messy, incredibly confusing, political, personal, exactly like real history usually is. And yet, that's not the version we remember, is it? Because complicated doesn't become legend. Simple does. So, who benefited? Stuart Lake got a bestseller. Hollywood got a franchise. America got the frontier hero it wanted. And somewhere in all of that, the actual Wyatt Earp, well, he kind of vanished. Now, let's leave Arizona for a minute and head over to Scotland, or more accurately, 1995, pretending to be Scotland. Now, before anyone gets mad, I love Braveheart. I really do. This movie has been making dads everywhere want to yell freedom in inappropriate situations for over 30 years. It's fantastic. Emotionally. Historically? Buddy, it's held together with chewing gum and vibes. Because after Wyatt Earp, I started thinking, surely that was a one-off. Surely. No one wins Best Picture by just making shit up. Right? Wrong. So let's start with something harmless. The kilts. The most iconic image in the entire movie. William Wallace standing on a hill, sword in hand, blue face paint, clan tartan. Wynn dramatically doing whatever Wynn gets paid to do in the movies. Absolutely unforgettable. Also, wrong century. Not slightly off, or historians disagree. Wrong century. The kilt everyone pictures did not exist yet. So the visual identity of one of the most famous historical films ever made is from roughly 300 years later. Okay, that's funny. I can live with that. Movies do costume stuff all the time. But then I kept reading. The blue face paint? Also wrong. That tradition belongs to the ancient Picts, who lived roughly 1,000 years earlier. That's not historical accuracy anymore. That's the wardrobe department spinning the wheel of Scotland. At this point, I'm kind of laughing because, okay, Hollywood made Scotland into one giant historical buffet. A little bit of this century, a little bit of that century. Sprinkle in some slow motion, give Hans Zimmer a call, we're good. Then I got to Isabella, and everything stopped being funny for a second because in the movie, Wallace falls in love with Princess Isabella. It's emotional, it's tragic, it's one of the biggest relationships in the entire film. But historically, she was a kid. Depending on where you are in the timeline, she's either nowhere near Scotland or she's so young that the entire romance becomes impossible. So Hollywood looked at the real timeline, crossed it out, and wrote, hey, what a forbidden romance? Dude, absolutely not. Then I discovered my favorite thing in this entire episode, the Battle of Stirling Bridge. You know, that famous battle with the bridge. There is no bridge. Steve, can you come here for a second? Steve, what's the name of the battle? Exactly. Now, what's missing from the movie? Correct. The bridge. I know! And for anyone who can't understand disembodied eldritch horrors, he's saying, brother, it's called Stirling Bridge. And he's right. Imagine making a movie called Jaws, and halfway through someone says, you know what? Lose the shark. Or making Titanic, and the boat just has a really stressful afternoon. Steve, I need you to calm down. No, we're not starting a petition. No, Mel Gibson is not coming on the show. He's impossible. Now, here's the part that actually fascinated me. The movie isn't just getting random details wrong, it's building a cleaner story. A poorer hero, a simpler villain, a romance that never happened. A betrayal that history doesn't really support. Because real history, like we've said before, is incredibly messy. And messy doesn't fit into a 2-hour movie. Myths do. And then I found out something that made this whole thing click. One of the biggest inspirations for Braveheart was a poem written around 170 years after William Wallace died. Not by someone who knew him, or by someone who witnessed the events firsthand, but a poem based on stories passed from person to person for generations. Which means, and I say this with all the love in my heart, Braveheart is partly based on medieval fan fiction, and somehow that fan fiction won Best Picture. Just think about that. Most of us don't know William Wallace. We know Mel Gibson's William Wallace, because that's the version that survived. And that's when something started bothering me, because now we'd done Wyatt Earp, now Wallace. And the pattern wasn't movies exaggerate. The pattern was someone builds the myth, then someone bigger mass produces it. And my friends, that pattern was about to get a whole hell of a lot darker. Now, we've had some fun. We've laughed about kilts. Steve is still somewhere around the house writing angry letters about the missing bridge. But this is where the rabbit hole stopped being funny, at least for me. Because the next movie I looked up was Pocahontas. And I figured, hey, it's Disney. They probably cleaned a few things up. Sure. Disney simplifies stories. That's just what Disney does. They make fairy tales. They make talking animals. They make me cry over an anthropomorphic beast man in Beauty and the Beast. I'm willing to give Disney some room. But then I started reading, and I remember actually setting my phone down because I needed a minute. You see, most of us picture Pocahontas because of the movie. She's a young woman. John Smith is the adventurous explorer. There's romance, music, a talking tree, a raccoon that somehow has more personality than most movie side characters. It's incredibly beautiful. But it's also not at all what happened. Her real name was Matoaka, Pocahontas was a childhood nickname, and when John Smith arrived in Virginia, she was about 10 years old. 10. John Smith was 27. That's it. That's the joke. There isn't one, because there shouldn't be. Disney aged her up, because otherwise, you don't get a romance. And if you have to age up a real child to make your romance work, maybe the romance shouldn't be there. But then I kept reading, because apparently I enjoy emotional damage. The famous story where she throws herself across John Smith to save his life, most historians think that either didn't happen the way Smith later described it, or he misunderstood a ritual. And that's worth remembering, because the version almost all of us know comes largely from John Smith telling the story years later, not from Matoaka herself. Then you learn what actually happened to her. She was kidnapped, held captive, forced to convert to Christianity, given a brand new name, married to John Rolfe, taken to England, displayed almost like proof that English colonization was working. And she died there, around the age of 21. She never made it back home. That's the real ending. No sweeping music, no happily ever after, no colors of the wind. Just a young woman whose life became useful to someone else's story. And that's when something clicked for me. Because up until now, I'd been asking, why change history? But that's the wrong question. The much better question is, who does the change help? Because just think about the Disney version. It's comforting. Everyone's basically good. Love conquers misunderstanding. The cultures just needed to get to know each other. No one has to wrestle with conquest. No one has to wrestle with power. No one has to wrestle with what colonization actually looked like. The myth softens all of it. And suddenly, this wasn't about historical accuracy anymore. This was about comfort. Because myths don't just make heroes. Sometimes they make us feel better about things we'd rather not look at too closely. And that realization hit me harder than any wrong kilt ever could. Now, this last one is a bit different because Wyatt Earp has been gone for almost a century. William Wallace has been gone for about 700 years. Matoaka has been gone for over 400. Chris Kyle, he doesn't feel like history. He still feels current. And before we go another step, I want to say something clearly. Chris Kyle served his country. That happened. He deployed multiple times. That happened. He risked his life. That happened. Nothing we're talking about today changes any of that, because this isn't about taking something away from someone who served. It's about something else entirely. It's about what happens when a real person slowly stops being just a person and starts becoming an idea. Because after everything we'd already looked at, I was no longer asking, is the movie accurate? I was asking, is this another myth? And the answer, well, it isn't as simple as yes or no, which honestly makes it the most interesting example of the bunch. You see, American Sniper is based on Chris Kyle's own autobiography, not a biography written 50 years later. His autobiography, his own story, his own words. And that's already different, because when you tell your own story, you're also telling the story you believe about yourself. And we're all unreliable narrators sometimes. Every single one of us. Just think about it. Retell a story from high school. Now, ask your best friend to tell the exact same story, and you're about to meet two completely different main characters. You see, memory is weird. Pride is weird. Trauma is weird. Human beings, we are weird. Now, some of the claims in Kyle's book were later challenged. His official military awards differed from what was listed in the autobiography. The Jesse Ventura story ended up in court. Other stories he told could not be independently verified. Those facts are part of the historical record now. But here's what fascinated me. Not the discrepancies, the reaction to the discrepancies. Because by then, Chris Kyle had become bigger than Chris Kyle. He had become a symbol. You see, to some people, he represented patriotism. To others, he represented the Iraq War. To others, he represented American exceptionalism. To others, he represented everything they disliked about modern war. Everyone needed him to mean something. And once someone becomes a symbol, people stop treating them like a complicated human being because symbols aren't allowed to be messy. They're not allowed to contradict themselves. They're not allowed to be complicated. They have to stay exactly the shape we need them to be. That's not really about Chris Kyle anymore. That's about us. Because we do this constantly, not just with soldiers, but with politicians, scientists, athletes, musicians, celebrities, authors, hell, even the founding fathers themselves. The second someone becomes larger than life, we stop letting them be life-sized. And then I found something that genuinely made me stop reading for a second. One former Navy SEAL talked about how people around Kyle knew parts of the legend had problems, but did not really want to challenge it, because by then the story itself had become valuable. And that's when I realized that's the same thing we'd already seen. Not the same facts, but the same pattern. Wyatt Earp, William Wallace, Matoaka, Chris Kyle. Completely different centuries, completely different people, completely different reasons, but the exact same machine. Someone tells a story, someone repeats it, someone polishes it, someone profits from it. Eventually, the story becomes more important than the actual person. And that is a terrifying sentence. You know what's funny? This isn't the episode I thought I was setting out to make. I honestly thought this was going to be 35 minutes of me roasting Hollywood. Wrong kilt, missing bridges, cowboys that apparently coordinated outfits better than my family does for Christmas pictures. I thought it was going to be, hey, look how ridiculous the movies are. But that's not what this turned into. Because somewhere between Wyatt Earp, William Wallace, Matoaka, and Chris Kyle, I realized something. Hollywood isn't the beginning of the story. It's usually the end. The myth already exists. Hollywood just gives it a soundtrack. Just think about it. Every single person that we've talked about today, they started out as a human being. Messy, complicated, contradictory, like all of us. Then, little by little, someone cleaned them up. Someone took out the parts that didn't fit. Someone sharpened the edges, made the hero just a little more heroic, and made the villain just a little more villainous. Made the story easier to tell. And then we inherited it. Not because anyone sat us down and lied to us, but because stories are how human beings remember things. That's the part I can't stop thinking about, because maybe myths aren't really about the past. Maybe they're about the present. Maybe every generation rewrites yesterday to explain today. Maybe we build Wyatt Earp because we wanted a cleaner American West. Maybe we build Wallace because freedom feels better when one guy carries the whole dream. Maybe we soften Matoaka because the truth asks harder questions than we're comfortable answering. And maybe we turn Chris Kyle into a symbol because complicated wars create an almost unbearable hunger for uncomplicated heroes. Maybe the myths say more about us than they ever did about them. And if that's true, how many people do I think I know that I only know through someone else's story? How many historical figures have I never actually met? How many legends am I carrying around that someone carefully assembled before I was born? Because here's the thing, I don't think this ends with Hollywood. I think Hollywood was just the easiest place to see it. I think this is everywhere. From history, politics, religion, sports, music, video games, corporations, countries, families, hell, probably me, probably you. We all tell stories about ourselves, and we all leave parts out. We all become the main character in our own autobiography. That's just being human. But every once in a while, it's worth asking, what actually happened. Not because the truth is always prettier, usually it isn't, but because real people deserve to be remembered as real people, not action figures, not saints or monsters, but people. Yes, Steve? What? You have a list. Buddy, that's not a list. That's a 3-ring binder. What's in it? Billy the Kid, Cleopatra, Blackbeard, Joan of Arc, Rasputin, King Arthur, Robin Hood, Napoleon, the Titanic, Disney, Custer, Tesla, Edison? Steve, I think we accidentally found another show. No, not another conspiracy show, but something different. Not who was right, not who was wrong. Who were they? Really? Who built the legend? And why did that version survive? Yeah, I kind of think that's worth chasing. And that's a wrap on today's edition of Ctrl Alt Delusion. And honestly, I have a feeling this won't be the last time we talk about this. Because I don't think we just stumbled into 4 inaccurate movies. I think we stumbled into one of the oldest things human beings have ever done. We create myths, sometimes to inspire, sometimes to explain, sometimes to protect, and sometimes because the truth is harder to carry. If today's episode made you stop and go, wait a minute, what else have I accepted without ever questioning it? Then mission accomplished. All of today's sources will be in the show notes. As always, don't take my word for it. Go read them yourself. And then come hang out with us over in the lobby, whether that's on Facebook or the Discord. I'll have links to both in the show notes as well. And tell me, what's one historical figure you've always wondered about? Who's someone you think history might have, I don't know, cleaned up just a little, or torn down, or just simply misunderstood? Because Steve apparently has enough material planned to keep us busy until the sun explodes. No, we are not doing an episode about Atlantis next week. Calm down. I know you have maps, and I don't care. Real quick shout out to My Player 2. Thank you for unknowingly launching an entire new series just by suggesting we sit down and watch an all-time classic. I've been Nate. Stay gold, nerd bold. And remember, history belongs to everyone. Legends usually belong to whoever told the story last. And I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.